Welcome to the Oracle Mobile Application Framework YouTube channel. This session is where we start to drill into what makes up a feature, and I'll demonstrate how to create and deploy a simple application consisting of application features. You'll also get an insight into some of the building blocks you will be using day in and day out, such as AMX pages, task flows, and data controls. Let's first start by looking at the application functionality we're going to build. So this will be a quick look at the MAF application that shows a few features that a MAF developer will use on a regular basis. I'm running this application on Windows in the Android emulator. To open the application, click the MAF employee icon. The application opens to the default first page, which in our case is the employee list view. You can click on each of the employees, which could link you to more information if it was available. I've added a couple of other pages, one of which is a graph page, which shows employee salaries. Click the graph button to open the page. The graph shows the salary of each person with names across the bottom and salaries on the left. There's a back button that takes us back to the employee list page. There's also a picture button that takes us to a picture page that uses the device camera feature. In this case, it's just a simulated camera. Click the shutter button to take the picture and the check mark to accept it. This takes you to the picture page to see the results. Click the back button to go back to the employee list view page. So let's see how we can start building some of that functionality into an application. Now before we jump into the IDE, let's take a quick tour around the principal building blocks of a feature. Broadly speaking, the main building blocks you will see will be an AMX page and a task flow. A feature can comprise of a single AMX page. That is the principal user interface page in an Oracle MAF application. An AMX page would typically comprise of various out-of-the-box MAF UI components bound to some sort of back-end data source or application function. So for an example, an AMX page could contain a list of employees coming from an enterprise database via a web service. It could have buttons to trigger functions on that list, for example, adding a new employee detail, or it could include some more exotic MAF components like this geographic MAF component for plotting employees' locations on a map. The second core building block of a MAF feature is called a task flow. In its simplest form, a task flow is simply a flow between two or more AMX pages. So if a feature requires you to have a page with an employee information, but also allows navigation to a second page to view a graph of their salary over time, then those two AMX pages would be designed into a task flow, and your feature content would be a task flow of two pages rather than a single AMX page. So a task flow can be a flow of 2 pages, or 3 pages, however many you need. Now notice that we say task flow rather than page flow, and this is because the flow isn't restricted to only pages. You can also have a task flow that involves calling a method as part of that flow. And after calling the method, you could call another page or even call another task flow. The idea behind task flow is they help developers partition and modularize feature development. We can develop a functional flow of pages in isolation from other parts of the page flow, yet be able to very simply bring them together and reuse them throughout an application. Another building block you'll see in the demo is something you will learn about later in this series called a data control. When building a mobile application, the actual business logic that implements your business process could be implemented in any number of technologies. You could be reading or writing data to the local SQLite database, or you could be accessing information from a REST or SOAP service, or you could implement using a local POJO. One thing that Oracle MAF provides is the ability to have a layer of abstraction across all of these business services. So you as the page developer aren't burdened with the finer details of the implementation. This layer of abstraction is referred to as data controls. That means that when it comes to building the pages to expose these functions, it can be done in a consistent manner. In many cases, it can be done by simply dragging and dropping data or a function onto the page and hooking it up to a data component such as a list or text field or to an action component such as a button. This is possible because the IDE knows how to deal with this common interface. So here you can see the data control gives you a generic abstraction of how to send SMS, and you can see that adding an employee is abstracted in the same way. If I wanted to trigger that business level function from a button press, I would simply drag and drop that data control onto the appropriate button. So now that you've had a whistle-stop tour of the basics, let's build a simple application. So the core of a MAF application is a feature. As we build this application, we start by defining a feature. OEPE provides a MAF feature editor that is just for that. The editor is in the View project under MAF. Double-click MAF Feature Editor to open the editor and then click Features. Click the green plus sign to add a feature. I'll name this feature Employees. So now I'll add content to the feature. The content can be an AMX page, a task flow, a local HTML file, or a remote URL. I'm selecting task flow. Now I can select an existing task flow by clicking Browse, or I can create a task flow now, which is what I'm doing. I'll name it Employee Task Flow. I now have a feature named Employees, and the content of that feature is a task flow. So now that we have a task flow, we need to add content to it. Task flows are made of a number of activities. They can have views, which point to pages, routers, which are decision points which control flow. They also have control flow cases, which provide navigation paths between activities. You'll see a lot more about those in later episodes, but for now, just know that those are the building blocks of a task flow and are really pretty simple to use. When you create a view activity, you can also create the underlying page. When you do, OEPE opens the new page in the page editor, which is where you add content. You'll see a palette on the left side of the editor, which shows all of the components that you can add to a page. These are drag and drop components that you simply drag to the page editor where you want them to display. There are both tags, simple components that are not bound to data, and data controls, which are bound to the underlying data model. So let's see how to build the first page, the employee list view. I'm starting with employee task flow, and we'll drag a view activity to the task flow and name it employee list. When I double-click the activity, I can create the underlying page. I'll accept the default name for the AMX page, which is the same as the activity. Since I know that I want to see employees' data, I open the Data tab, expand Employee Service, and drag Employees to the page. I drop it after the closing AMX facet tag, so it will show after the header info on the page, but within the panel. When I drop it, I have all kinds of options to display this data. I'm selecting List View. For List View, there are a number of defined formats you can choose. I'm selecting the list that groups the data and has dividers. Now I just define the divider as the first letter of the name. So that adds the List View component to the page. Now I want to dress up the page a little by adding a title. The default title is Header, so I'll change that to Employees. I can do that in either the Code or use the Properties tab. So that's all there is to it. Now I'll run the page to see what I've created. Click the Debug icon and select Debug Configurations. This configuration selects the target platform and the device or emulator I have running. Click Debug to start the deployment. I'll click MAF Employee to open the application, and it opens to the Employee List view, which for the moment is the only content in the application. Each row in the list is selectable. Okay, so now that I have a simple page, let's look at what else we can do. So you've seen how to add a single page to a task flow. Now let's look at how to use a task flow for multiple pages. One of the key values of a task flow is that it provides page navigation that is managed by a controller rather than hard-coded addresses in a page. You define that control using control flow cases. These cases can define any navigation path you want your users to take. There are only two steps in creating and using a control flow case. Create it, and then define its use in the page. Creating a control flow case is pretty easy. Just click the control flow case in the palette, click the source activity, and then the destination activity, and name it. That's it. To use the case, either use an existing button on the page or create one and set the button action to the name of the case you want to use. The controller then does all the rest. So let's look at creating another activity and connecting it to the employee list. So I'll go back to the task flow and add a view activity. This will be for the graph, so I'll name it Graph. Next, I'll add a control flow case from employee list to graph. I'll name it Show Graph. Just like before, I'll double-click the view to create the AMX page and accept the default name. The page opens in the editor. I'll change the header of the page to Graph using the Properties tab. Next, I'll add a data-bound component from the Data tab. I'll drag employees to the page as I did before, but this time I'll select Chart, Bar. I'll accept the default layout and configure the bar chart with salary for the bars and name for the x-axis. That's all there is to creating a graph with the employee data. Now I'll add a little navigation. First, set the primary button on the graph page to use the built-in back navigation. This will take the user back to the calling page. Next, I'll add navigation to the employee list page to get me to the graph page. So I'll select the Employee List Page tab, select the primary command button, and in the Properties tab, set the text to Graph and the button action to Show Graph. That's it. Now I'll save my work and run the application just as before. On the Employee List page, click the Graph button and the controller navigates to the graph page and displays the content, which is the graph. So that's how to create a graph and how to connect pages using a task flow. So now let's look at using a device feature. With MAF, you can access device features such as camera, email, GPS, contacts, and so on from your application. These device services are automatically included in the Data Controls tab. However, to use them, your feature has to request access from the application, and of course, the application has to grant access. You'll see all of that shortly. Each device feature that you may add to your application has different requirements. For example, if you use contacts, then the arguments to the method would be things like name, nickname, address, and so on. If you're using a camera feature, the arguments are going to be things like quality, type of photo, height, and width. When you add one of these features to your page, OEPE will prompt you for all the required arguments. So let's go back and add a camera feature to the application. So just like before, I'll add a view activity to the task flow and name it Picture. I'll also add a navigation case from Employee List to Picture. Now I'll create the page and accept the default name. In the code, I'll set the header text to Take Picture. Next, I'll drag the Get Picture method to the page and drop it as a method button. OEPE knows what arguments this method needs, so it prompts me for them. I'm just entering values for those arguments. When I finish with those and create the component, OEPE knows that I need device access for this feature. It asks me if I want to open the application editor and grant access to this feature. In the application editor, I select Camera Access and save my work. Next, I need to go to the feature editor and request access to the camera feature. You could do these steps in any order. On the picture page, all we have is a button to call the Get Picture method, but haven't added anything to display the result. That's what I'll do next. If you look at the method in the Data tab, it shows a return type of string. Well, I know it's not really a string, and so does OEPE. When I drag that string to the page and drop it as a text, one of the display choices is image. That will take the return value and display it as an image. The last thing I need to do on this page is to add navigation to get back to the calling page. Just as I did earlier, select the primary command button and set the text to back and the action to back. So now we can get back to the calling page, but we haven't yet set a button to get to this page. So back on the employee list page, I'll set the secondary command button action to Take Picture and the text to Picture. That's it. Now we can run the page just as before and check the results. On the employee list page, click the Picture button. This calls the device camera feature, which is in this case a simulated camera. Click the Shutter button to take the picture and the check mark to accept it. This takes you back to the picture page where you can see the results. I can click the Back button to go back to the employee list page also. So in this episode, you've seen me get hands-on with building a basic feature, and you've seen how to develop a simple AMX page and a task flow. Thanks for watching, and make sure to look out for the next episode on this channel.